The air smelled of blood. Not fresh, but old, stale and cloying, woven into the walls of this floating graveyard they called a prison. The lights flickered, casting jagged shadows over the steel floors, and the sound of heavy boots echoed down the corridor. For guards, clad in reinforced armor, marched forward with weapons drawn, surrounding a lone prisoner. Chains clinked with each step she took, the cuffs around her wrists and ankles humming with containment energy. Sable kept her head down, unbothered by the restraints. She could feel the guards' tension, the way their fingers hovered over their triggers. They were afraid. Good. Fear was useful. The lead guard, a broad-shouldered brute with a scar running down his cheek, activated the intercom beside the thick blast door. Prisoner 624 is ready for insertion. A burst of static, then a reply. Proceed. The door hissed open, revealing a chamber shrouded in half-darkness. The walls were reinforced alloy, thick enough to hold creatures that should not exist. Inside, hunched shapes stirred, alien, inhuman things that shifted at the scent of new blood. One of the guards smirked. This ought to be fun. He planted a boot in Sable's back and shoved her inside. She stumbled forward, but caught herself with ease, lifting her gaze to scan the room. The door slammed shut behind her, the locks grinding into place with finality. A prison within a prison. The other occupants watch her now. Korlak the Bone Eater sat against the far wall, a mountain of scarred flesh and exposed bone. His mouth split open in a grotesque grin, revealing jagged teeth he'd used to tear apart more creatures than anyone cared to count. To his left, a serpentine figure coiled in the shadows. Sithis, a venom-spitting assassin with enough kills to make even warlords uneasy. And then there were the others, a collection of nightmares from different corners of the galaxy. She met their gazes unfazed. Korlak chuckled, his voice a deep, rattling growl. They really threw you in here with us? That's just cruel. Sable tilted her head. Yeah, for you. Silence. Then laughter, low and rough, spreading through the chamber like a sick joke. But beneath it was something else, curiosity, wariness. She wasn't what they'd expected. Korlak stood, his massive frame casting a shadow over her. Let's get one thing straight, little girl. I run this cage. She didn't move, didn't blink. You got two choices, he continued, cracking his knuckles. Submit or break. Sable finally smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. Third option, she said. You choke on your own bones. He snarled and lunged. For a creature of his size, he was fast. Most things in this cage were predators had to be, but Sable was faster. She twisted aside, her movements effortless, and let his momentum carry him forward. His massive fist slammed into the steel wall, denting it on impact. Before he could recover, she moved. A sharp twist of her body, a sweep of her leg. She hooked his knee, sending him crashing down. In the same motion, she yanked the chains still attached to her wrists and wrapped them around his throat. Korlak struggled, his hands clawing at the restraints, but she held firm, using his own weight against him. His massive body convulsed, muscle straining. His eyes bulged. The others watched in stunned silence. Then, with one final jerk, she let go. Korlak collapsed, gasping, coughing up blood. He was alive, barely. Sable crouched beside him. Submission or break? He wheezed, blinking through pain and disbelief. She patted his cheek. Smart choice. The tension in the room shifted. She stood, rolling her shoulders. The chains on her wrists had snapped from the strain. She flexed her fingers, feeling the weight of freedom, however brief. A prisoner near the back muttered, I think we just met the real monster. Another, more brazen, chuckled. Well, guess who's not getting a last meal anymore? The dark amusement spread, but it was tinged with something deeper. Unease. Sable ignored them, glancing toward the reinforced glass at the far end of the chamber. She could feel eyes on her. Someone was watching. Outside, in a control room bathed in cold blue light, a scientist leaned forward, adjusting his glasses. He turned to the warden, standing beside him. Do you know what you've put in there with him? The warden, an older man with tired eyes, scoffed. A prisoner. The scientist exhaled, shaking his head. No, A catastrophe. Korlak lay where he had fallen, chest heaving, eyes glassy with shock. His hands trembled as they pressed against his throat, as if to reassure himself it was still there. Sable had seen that look before, the raw disbelief of a predator realizing it had become prey. No one spoke at first. The only sounds were the distant thrum of the station's engines and the flickering of overhead lights, casting erratic shadows along the metal walls. The air inside the cage felt different now, thick with something unspoken. Then Sithis, the venomous assassin coiled in the farthest corner, tilted his head. His slitted pupils narrowed as he regarded her. "Well," he said finally, his voice a whispering hiss. "That was unexpected." A low murmur passed through the other inmates. They were killers, mercenaries, monstrosities from the worst corners of the galaxy. But even monsters understood hierarchy. Korlak had been their apex, and Sable had toppled him in seconds. That changed things. Someone in the back grumbled, "You hear stories, but you don't really believe them until you see it." Sable arched a brow. "Stories?" The speaker, a wiry, insectoid thing with too many eyes, hesitated before answering. "They say you walked through a war zone, untouched. That you made an entire Black Ops squad disappear." Sithis chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Some say you aren't even human." Sable's lips twitched, not quite a smile. "Funny, I don't remember any of them." It was true. She didn't remember most of the people she had killed, only the ones that had made the mistake of thinking they could win. One of the younger inmates shifted uneasily. "What are you?" Sable let the silence stretch. Then she cracked her neck and said, "Hungry." Dark amusement rippled through the prisoners, breaking some of the tension, but Sithis was still watching her too closely. Calculating. She could almost hear the gears turning in his mind. He was considering whether she was a threat to eliminate, or something else. Before he could decide, the station shuddered. A warning siren blared through the walls, red lights flashing in rhythmic pulses. The overhead speakers crackled before a distorted voice rang out. "Containment breach detected in Sector 7. All units respond." Sable felt the shift immediately. This wasn't a drill. The other prisoners tensed, glancing toward the locked exit. Some looked eager, others wary. Then the thick, reinforced door groaned as the mechanisms securing it released. A slow smile spread across Sithis's face. "Looks like someone upstairs just made a mistake." The door slid open. No one moved at first. It was too easy, too abrupt. Then Korlak, still recovering but fueled by the primal urge to reassert dominance, shoved himself up with a guttural growl and made for the exit. He didn't even spare Sable a glance. His pride was shattered, and now he wanted something to kill. A few others followed, slipping through the doorway into the corridor beyond. Sable didn't move. She waited. She counted the seconds. 3, 2, 1. Gunfire erupted outside. Screams followed. Korlak stumbled back into the room, blood splattering his chest. His wide eyes locked onto Sable, but this time they held no arrogance, only confusion. Then he collapsed, revealing what stood behind him. The Omega Guards. 7 of them, clad in tactical armor, weapons raised. Their movements were sharp, calculated, no hesitation. These weren't the same guards who had thrown Sable into the cage. These were professionals. One of them, likely the squad leader, motioned toward her. Target acquired. Sable's eyes flickered to the control panel outside the cage, then back to them. She rolled her shoulders. "Good," she murmured. "I was getting bored." The first shot rang out. She moved before the sound had even fully registered, twisting aside as the bullet tore through the space she had occupied a fraction of a second before. Another round followed, then another, but she was already in motion, closing the distance between them with impossible speed. One guard managed to get a shot off at point-blank range. She caught his wrist, redirected the weapon, and the round went straight through the throat of the soldier beside him. The first body hit the ground. The others barely had time to react before she was among them. Blades sang through the air. Sithis had joined the fight, his serpentine form weaving through the chaos, venom-coated daggers slicing through armor. The other prisoners took their chance as well, but most of them were cannon fodder, cut down within seconds. Sable didn't care. She grabbed the nearest guard, wrenched his rifle from his grasp, and used it to bludgeon him into unconsciousness. Another tried to flank her. She spun, grabbing him by the collar and driving a knee into his gut hard enough to shatter ribs. Dark humor flickered in the back of her mind as she ducked another round of fire. Think fast. Oh, wait, you can't. She slammed the butt of the rifle into a soldier's face, sending him sprawling. More gunfire. More bodies. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the battle was over. Sable exhaled slowly, surveying the carnage. Blood slicked the floor, pooling around motionless bodies. Smoke curled from the barrel of a discarded rifle. The Omega Guards were gone. The few prisoners who had survived lingered in the aftermath, breathless, waiting for her. Sable turned to the corridor beyond. There would be more soldiers, more fights. Her eyes flicked to the security cameras overhead. Someone was watching. She lifted a hand, mockingly slow, and waved at the lens. Inside the control room, the warden cursed under his breath. Call reinforcements, he snapped. The scientist beside him, however, didn't look as alarmed as he should have. He was watching Sable with something closer to fascination. This isn't a woman, he murmured, almost to himself. This is an extinction-level event. The bodies were still warm when the next wave came. Sable heard them before she saw them. The rhythmic stomp of reinforced boots, the mechanical hiss of reloaded plasma rifles, the unmistakable sound of authority descending. The prisoners still standing tensed as the scent of ozone filled the air, the prelude to gunfire. And then they arrived. The Omega Guards had been elite. These men were something else. Heavier armor, advanced visors, no insignia, no names. They moved with the kind of precision that meant one thing. They weren't here to capture. They were here to erase. A voice crackled over their comms, loud enough for Sable to hear. Authorization granted. Lethal force only. Sable exhaled, rolling her shoulders. Well, that makes things simple. The first shot screamed through the air. She twisted aside, but they weren't just firing at her. The other prisoners barely had time to react before the corridor became a killing field. One fell, then another, bodies dropping in heaps as the air filled with the scent of scorched flesh. The survivors scrambled for cover. Sithis vanished into the shadows, his body blending into the flickering emergency lights. A few others returned fire, but it was a joke. Their weapons were stolen, their skills crude in comparison. This wasn't a fight. It was a purge. Sable ran straight toward them. The nearest guard barely had time to react before she grabbed his rifle, twisted it sideways, and used the momentum to snap his wrist. He didn't even scream before she kicked him backward into his squadmates, sending them crashing like dominoes. The next guard tried to flank her. She grabbed his visor, slammed his head into the wall, and yanked his sidearm from its holster in the same motion. She emptied the clip into the advancing line, the sharp crack, crack, crack of gunfire echoing through the corridor. One soldier got a lucky shot. The round tore through her side, burning white-hot. She barely flinched. Pain was just a reminder she was still alive. The guards adjusted, moving into a defensive formation, weapons recalibrating for autolock. They weren't panicking. That was the problem with professionals. They fought by the book. Sable didn't. She charged. One leapt back, startled too late. She was already inside their defenses, wrenching her rifle upward so the blast caught another guard in the chest. Something coiled in the darkness. A hiss, a flicker of movement. Sithis struck, his twin blades slicing through a soldier's exposed throat before he slithered back into the shadows. One of the last remaining guards turned, frantic, trying to track the assassin. Sable took the opportunity to kick him in the teeth. The fight ended as fast as it had begun. Blood pooled beneath bodies, dark and glistening in the emergency lights. The only sounds were heavy breathing and the distant blare of alarms. A dry chuckle broke the silence. Think they got our surrender request? Sithis muttered, flicking blood from his daggers. Another prisoner groaned from the ground. Yeah, loud and clear. Sable didn't answer. She was already looking ahead, eyes narrowing as she spotted something mounted along the corridor wall. A security panel. She strode toward it, stepping over the bodies without care. The screen flickered, warning symbols flashing red, but that wasn't what interested her. She tapped a few keys, fingers moving fast. The prisoners behind her stirred. "What are you doing?" "Finding the real threat," she murmured. Then she saw it. The station schematics. And something worse. The entire cage sector, this whole wing of the prison, had been decoupled from the main station. Her lips pressed into a thin line. "They're cutting us loose." The prisoners stiffened. "They wouldn't," one muttered, but there was no conviction in his voice. "They would," Sithis said grimly. "And they are." A static-filled voice crackled from the intercom. "Containment breach exceeds acceptable risk. Ejecting Sector 7 in 60 seconds. Sable exhaled through her nose. The warden had made his decision. He was going to flush them into the void rather than risk letting her escape. She should have expected this. No, she had expected this. It just meant she had to move faster. She pressed another sequence on the panel, scanning the security systems. She needed a way out. A hangar bay. Not far. But reaching it in under a minute? Impossible. She turned, scanning the survivors. They were strong, but not fast enough. Most wouldn't make it. That wasn't her problem. She looked at Sithis. "You want to live?" His forked tongue flickered. "Usually, then keep up." She ran. The others scrambled after her. But the moment she turned the first corner, she knew the truth. Asterisk, asterisk, they wouldn't all make it. Asterisk, asterisk. Behind her, the ship rumbled as its emergency systems activated. The bulkheads shuddered. The first decoupling bolts fired. The prison wing was already detaching. Sable pushed harder. A prisoner tripped. Someone screamed. The metal under their feet lurched. She didn't stop. Sithis kept pace beside her, his movements eerily fluid. But the others? They were slowing. And then, asterisk, asterisk, the floor behind them disappeared. Asterisk, asterisk. The pressure shift hit instantly. Air ripped backward along with bodies, metal, debris. The void was taking them. Sable didn't turn around. She couldn't. She reached the final bulkhead as it began to close. Sithis dived through first. Sable followed a fraction of a second later. The reinforced doors slammed shut behind them. The station groaned. Then, with a deep, horrible shudder, Sector 7 was gone. Ripped away, jettisoned into space like trash. Sable stood, breathing hard, her hands still clenched into fists. The others were gone. She didn't feel anything. Sithis exhaled, leaning against the wall. "Well," he murmured. That was dramatic. She didn't answer. She already knew what had to come next. The warden had made his choice. Now, she would make hers. The warden watched the screen with cold, unwavering eyes as Sector 7 was torn away from the prison station, tumbling into the void. Emergency klaxons still howled through the control room, but the chaos outside no longer concerned him. This was necessary. "Status?" he demanded. A technician hesitated before responding. "Sector 7 is fully ejected. No life signs detected. The anomaly is neutralized." The warden exhaled slowly. Good. For a moment, the tension in the room eased. The guards at their stations relaxed, shoulders dropping, hands leaving the triggers of their sidearms. Then the main display flickered. A single error message scrawled across the screen. Unauthorized access detected. The warden's fingers curled against the console. "Where?" The technician's hands trembled over the keyboard. "Hangar Bay 4. The warden's blood ran cold. That section was supposed to be sealed. A new feed replaced the static. It showed her. Sable moved through the hangar like a phantom, stepping over bodies, boots silent against the steel floor. She didn't rush. She didn't need to. The men stationed there had been dead for over a minute. The Omega guards hadn't even managed to fire their weapons. Her eyes lifted, locking onto the camera, as if she knew they were watching. Then, deliberately, she waved. The warden slammed his fist against the console. "Seal the hangar. Lock it down now." The technician's hands flew across the controls. "Sir, she's already bypassed." The hangar doors rumbled open. Beyond them, nestled in the docking bay like a slumbering beast, was an extraction ship. Her way out. Sable moved toward it, unhurried, like this was inevitable, like she had always been meant to escape. The warden grabbed the nearest guard's rifle, raising it toward the screen as if he could shoot her through it. "Override the system," he growled. "I want all firepower directed at that hangar." The technician's face went pale. "Sir, the station defenses are offline." The words barely registered. "What? We're locked out." She shut down the entire sector. The warden's breath hitched. She hadn't just escaped containment. She had taken control. Inside the hangar, Sable stepped onto the ship's loading ramp. Sithis was already in the cockpit, fingers dancing over the controls. The engines rumbled to life, the deep hum of power building beneath her feet. She glanced at the walls, at the rows of weaponry and supplies stored inside. The ship was well stocked. They had planned to send it after her. Now, she was taking it for herself. The overhead intercom crackled, the warden's voice spilling through the hangar. "You don't understand what you are." Sable paused. His voice was raw, almost desperate. "You think this is about imprisonment?" he continued. "You think this is about control?" A bitter laugh. "This station was never your cage, Sable. It was everyone else's shield." She tilted her head, listening. "You weren't locked away to be punished. You were locked away because you cannot be free." The hangar doors opened. Beyond them, the abyss stretched wide. The black tide of space, vast and endless. The ship lifted from the docking bay, hovering for a moment, its thrusters roaring. Sable stepped into the cockpit, standing beside Sithis as he guided them toward the void. The warden's voice came one last time, hollow and distant. "If you leave this station, you will drown the galaxy in blood." Sable's lips curved, not in amusement, not in cruelty, but in something colder. She leaned forward, pressing the intercom button on the console. Then she whispered, "Let's find out." And with that, the ship vanished into the stars.